He denied intel leaks to the media this morning. Trump tweeted saying Clapper called him to denounce the, quote, false and fictitious report. Now, this matters. Clapper did not use those words in his statement, which reads, we also discussed the private security company document, which was widely circulated in recent months among the media, members of Congress, and congressional staff, even before the IC became aware of it. I emphasize this document is not a U.S. intelligence community product, that I do not believe the leaks came from within the IC. The IC has not made any judgment that the information in this document is reliable. That does not say that they found it unreliable. And he says, and we did not rely upon it in any way for our conclusions. However, part of our obligation is to ensure policymakers are provided with the fullest possible picture of any matters that might affect national security. Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thank you for joining us. The question is pretty basic but vital at this point. What do you know about whether or not it is true that the FBI and maybe other intel agencies are looking into the allegations provided in this dossier because they found the source of the dossier credible?
Chris, I can't comment on that, but I can say this with reference to the conversation you just had about the director's statement as well as the president-elect's tweets. And that is, sadly, you simply cannot rely on the president-elect's tweets or statements about what he's receiving in intelligence briefings, and that's a real problem. And by that I mean the open report on the Russian hacking was very clear. It made no conclusions about whether the outcomes were affected by the hacking. That was beyond the scope of what the intelligence community looks at, and nonetheless that was misrepresented by the president-elect. So here,
right.
If people really want to know what Director Clapper had to say to Donald Trump, do not rely on Donald Trump's tweet, rely on Director Clapper's statement.
Right, look, I hear you about not wanting to divulge classified information, and I'm not sure if this is or isn't, but look, this was bouncing around some of this stuff. We know John McCain thought to give it to Comey. Comey said he already had, or somebody for Comey said they already had these documents. Harry Reid sent a letter to him saying, I know you're looking into these things. You know, James Comey even took the unprecedented step of coming out to discuss an investigation because of his perceived notion about its impact on politics. This situation is starting to move in that direction where the president-elect is giving one version of events that do not meet up with our reporting and the reckoning even of, it seems, the Director of National Intelligence. Are you sure that you can't confirm that these allegations are being looked into?
I can't comment on that, but I think you're absolutely right that Director Comey, when he testified, and Angus King asked him these questions during the Senate hearing, and he said he couldn't comment on any investigation that may be open or not open. That cannot be squared with his conduct during the whole investigation of the Hillary Clinton emails. And that's a very tough question that the director has to answer, why he might be treating this differently than he did the Clinton email situation. But I'm not privileged to be able to comment on what the community or FBI is investigating or what they're not investigating.
All right. So this relationship between the president-elect and the intel community, Clapper, you know, obviously the president could put his own people in charge of these intel community agencies. What is your concern going forward?
Well, my concern is that if the president-elect continues to want to either deny the scope of what the Russians did in this election or ignore intelligence when it comes to him that indicates that Putin is not doing what Putin is telling him, or that the Russians are taking action in violation of what promises may have been made to the president-elect, if he doesn't want to hear that information, there are ways that he can direct the intelligence community essentially to stop devoting resources to pursuing those leads. We're going to have to work very hard in the intelligence community on a bipartisan basis to make sure that we continue to invest in intelligence in Russia. They are one of the principal threats now facing the country. I think that's recognized by both sides of the aisle, so we're going to have to do that. One other point I would make, Chris, and that is, while I can't comment on what the intelligence community, FBI, may or may not investigate, I can tell you what I think Congress ought to investigate. And I think in the most nonpartisan way, and ideally through an independent commission along with a joint congressional investigation, We ought to follow the evidence of what the Russians did across all of their platforms of cyber malevolence and non-cyber malevolence to interfere and to influence our election. Now, they have used a variety of techniques here in the U.S. and in Europe. Those include hacking, blackmail, extortion, you name it. And if any of those things are implicated here, we ought to investigate them, and we ought to follow the facts wherever they lead.
Obamacare, first step taken in the Senate. Obviously, the American audience is getting a introduction into the legislative process, because even though it seems like these votes could be dispositive, they're all just little steps along the way. What is the Democrats' disposition right now to what the possible is here? Do you think you can save the ACA? Is the word to just oppose so that you don't have to own whatever happens? Or is there a good faith interest in working with the Republicans to salvage what you can and maybe improve what needs improving?
I think that we can save the ACA, and I think we can save it because, frankly, it's done a lot of good, and the Republicans have no idea what to do. They only have a campaign slogan, repeal and replace, but they've never had any idea what to replace with.
But you are losing the messaging war. You're losing the messaging war, even when we push back on the facts, which are fairly plain at this point. You know, premiums are doubling and tripling, yes, but the population affected by those is a very, very small percentage of the population, let alone the population under the ACA. People don't care. They think the ACA is broken, it needs to be fixed, and that was one of the driving forces in the election. How do you counter that?
You know, I think that's a misconception, because if you look at how many people support the ACA, and you add how many people don't support it because they think it should go farther, that is a majority of Americans. So you might make a stronger argument that they're losing the point. And I think, frankly, as we get closer to their repeal and no answer to replacement, they're going to lose more and more public support. When more Americans realize that what the Republicans really have in mind will have the effect of cutting millions and millions of people off of their health care, they will lose this fight. So I think Democrats need to stand strong. If there ever were an interest in improving the ACA, we will work with them. They've never demonstrated that interest. That's been the problem. Democrats like myself have acknowledged before the election, for years in fact, the ACA is not perfect. We ought to improve it. We ought to strengthen it. But there's been no interest in doing that in the GOP, and we can't do that alone in the minority. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting for it. And frankly, because they have no alternative, we have a chance of winning this fight.
Congressman, thank you for making the case on New Day. As always, appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks, Chris.
All right, Donald Trump.